Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. This time, we're really getting into it. We're going way beyond calories to get to the bottom of how sugar messes with your hormones.
Oh, this will be interesting.
It really will. We're diving deep into sugar, insulin, and modern disease. A hormonal perspective, and let me tell you, this might change how you think about that candy bar.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's like we're finally moving past that old calories in, calories out thing. It's just so much more complicated than that.
It really is. This source, it comes right out and says that more than 70%, get this, more than 70% of diseases we see today are linked to too much insulin. What's the deal with that?
Well, it used to be all about fighting off infections. Those were the big killers. But now it's like we're battling heart disease, diabetes, even some cancers. And a lot of it comes down to how we live and what we eat. Sugar plays a big part, I'd say. And excess insulin, it seems to be in the mix with a lot of these modern diseases. When your insulin's always high, it just causes so many issues. Inflammation, cell damage, even problems with other hormones that control things like your blood pressure or how hungry you feel.
So how do we even get to this point where we have too much insulin?
It's almost like our bodies are stuck in the past. Our ancestors didn't have all this refined sugar and processed carbs that are everywhere today. Their bodies didn't have to be on constant high alert, churning out insulin all the time to deal with those sugar spikes. But now our modern diet, with all its processed foods, it pushes our systems into overdrive. And that's how we end up with insulin resistance.
Right, insulin resistance. That's when our cells just stop listening to insulin's message, don't they?
Exactly. It's like a bad phone connection. Insulin is screaming, hey, cells, take in this glucose, but the message just gets lost. So what does the body do? It makes even more insulin, and you get trapped in this crazy cycle.
And insulin resistance, it's not just about blood sugars. It affects all kinds of hormones, right? Like this book, it specifically talks about PCOS and thyroid issues. How are they all linked?
You've got to remember, your endocrine system, it's like this big network of glands that make hormones, and they all talk to each other. If one hormone's out of whack, the others go haywire too. Take PCOS, for example. Too much insulin can really mess with those delicate reproductive hormones, leading to, well, irregular periods, those cysts on the ovaries, and trouble getting pregnant.
Wow, so it's not just about blood sugar control. It could be affecting fertility too.
You got it. And then there's the thyroid. Insulin resistance, you see, it can actually make it harder for your body to use thyroid hormone. That leads to all sorts of things. Fatigue, weight gain, difficulty concentrating, just a whole mess.
It's amazing how something as simple as eating sugar can have such a huge impact on so many different hormones.
It really is. And there's this other thing, and it challenges everything we thought we knew about cholesterol. For ages, we've been told that high cholesterol is the big bad wolf for heart disease. But this source, it takes a different stance. It suggests that maybe insulin resistance is the real culprit. They even bring up research that shows, believe it or not, higher LDL cholesterol, the bad kind, might actually be linked to living longer if you're over 60.
Wait, really? That just sounds so backwards. How does that even make sense?
You have to remember that just because two things happen together, it doesn't mean one causes the other. Just because you see high cholesterol in people with heart problems, it doesn't mean it's the cholesterol doing the damage. It could just be there because of something else that's actually causing the problem. In this case, it could be insulin resistance. It's like seeing people with umbrellas when it's raining. It doesn't mean the umbrellas cause the rain.
Oh, I see. Like correlation isn't always causation. So we need to be looking deeper at the root causes, not just what we see on the surface.
Exactly. And speaking of looking deeper, this source also talks about omega-3s and omega-6s, those fatty acids, and how they affect inflammation, which is a huge piece of this whole puzzle.
Okay, so before we got sidetracked talking about cholesterol, you mentioned something about omega-3s and omega-6s, those fatty acids. What's their connection to all this sugar and hormone stuff?
Right, omega-3s. You always hear about getting enough of those good fats from fish. But what people don't always get is that there's this balance between omega-3s and omega-6s.
Yeah, I know I'm supposed to be eating my salmon and taking fish oil, but I'm not really sure why they matter so much in this whole sugar discussion.
Well, it's all about inflammation, you see. Both omega-3s and omega-6s, they're involved in controlling inflammation all over your body. But the key is that they have to be balanced. Omega-3s, you can think of them like firefighters, calming things down. But omega-6s, they're kind of like adding fuel to the fire.
So it's not that omega-6s are bad, necessarily. It's that we need the right amount of both, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the problem is, with our modern diets, the balance is totally messed up. All this processed food, vegetable oils, meat from animals, fed grains. It's all loaded with omega-6s. And then we're not eating as much fish as we used to, so we end up with way too much omega-6 and not enough omega-3, and that just leads to more inflammation all the time.
This source, it says that we're eating like 25 times more omega-6s than omega-3s compared to our ancestors. That's a crazy amount, isn't it?
It really is. And this constant inflammation, it's a big factor in a lot of the diseases we've been talking about, heart disease, diabetes, some cancers. It's like a slow burn, just damaging your body over time.
So it's not just about cutting back on sugar. We need to get this inflammation under control too. What does this source recommend for getting our omegas back in balance?
Well, they talk about the Mediterranean diet as a good model. Lots of fish, of course, for those omega-3s, plus olive oil, veggies, nuts, and seeds, things that give you a better mix of those healthy fats.
That sounds delicious and, like something you could actually stick with.
But what about those of us who are already dealing with insulin resistance and all those other problems that come with it? Are there any, stronger tactics we can use?
Yeah, the source talks about the ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting as powerful weapons. But you got to remember, these aren't for everyone, and they're not something you just do all the time. It's more like, you have to be strategic.
Right. So not like just randomly firing a pistol, but more like carefully aiming and shooting. So how do these weapons work against insulin resistance?
Well, let's take the keto diet first. It's very high in fat and very low in carbs. It basically forces your body to switch from using glucose for fuel to burning fat. And that helps your body become more sensitive to insulin again, taking the strain off your poor pancreas.
So it's like we're retraining our bodies to use a different energy source. Gives the insulin system a break. Right. And then there's intermittent fasting. That's when you cycle between eating and not eating. That can also make yourself more sensitive to insulin. When you give your body a rest from digesting food all the time, it gives your cells a chance to start responding better to insulin's signals.
It seems like both of these are really about letting our bodies reset instead of being constantly bombarded with sugar and the insulin that comes with it.
Absolutely. But, there's this other hurdle that this source brings up, and it's a big one. It's the fact that sugar can be addictive.
That's a good point. We could talk all day about the right foods to eat and all the best ways to improve our insulin sensitivity, but if we're constantly battling those sugar cravings, it's going to be a tough fight.
Yeah, that's the thing. This source compares kicking a sugar habit to quitting alcohol or heroin. It's like they all trigger the same reward centers in your brain. You get those cravings and then the withdrawal symptoms. It's rough.
Whoa, really? Are you saying that sugar is actually as addictive as hard drugs?
It lights up the same reward pathways in the brain, leading to those intense cravings, makes it so hard to stop. But the good news is, with awareness, maybe some support, and by focusing on nourishing your body with real whole foods, it is possible to break that sugar addiction and get your health back on track.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful. It's really driven home the point that sugar is so much more than just empty calories. It's messing with our hormones, causing inflammation, even making us addicted.
It's a complicated issue, but I think the key takeaway is this. Knowledge is power. Once you understand how sugar affects you, you can start making better choices and escape those cravings and that dependence.
You know what? We've covered so much ground today, but I think we have time for one last crucial aspect of this. We need to talk about the psychological and emotional side of sugar addiction. Listeners, we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been exploring how sugar affects our bodies in all these crazy ways. We're talking hormone disruption, inflammation, and even, addiction.
It's wild, isn't it? You don't often think about how closely connected your physical and mental health are.
Before the break, you said something about sugar being addictive. This source compares it to, alcohol and heroin. That's a pretty serious claim. Can you tell me more about that? Why is sugar so hard to resist?
So here's the thing. When you eat sugar, your brain gets flooded with dopamine. That feel-good chemical. That's what makes you want to keep going back for more. But over time, all that sugar actually starts changing your brain chemistry, making it harder and harder to say no to those cravings.
So it's not just about being strong-willed or making better choices. There's actual physical stuff going on in our brains that makes us crave sugar.
Exactly. And then on top of that, there's the emotional connection to sugar. We tend to turn to sweet treats when we're feeling down, stressed out, or, just need a little pick-me-up.
Oh, yeah, I totally get that. We've all been there, right? Reaching for the ice cream after a bad day or, rewarding ourselves with a cookie or two.
Right. And those emotional ties, they make it even harder to break the cycle. It's not just about fighting the physical cravings, it's also about figuring out what emotional needs are being met by those sugary snacks.
So, with all that going on, how do we even start to untangle ourselves from this sugar web? It feels pretty overwhelming.
Well, the first step is just being aware of it. Start paying attention to your own habits. Notice when you reach for something sweet, what's going on in your life? What are you feeling at that moment?
You're saying it's about being more mindful of our eating habits and really understanding why we're making those choices.
Yeah. And once you know what your triggers are, you can find healthier ways to deal with them. Like if stress is making you crave sugar, maybe try yoga, meditation, or just spending some time in nature. If it's boredom, find something fun to do, a new hobby, something to keep your mind engaged.
So basically, swap those sugary quick fixes for something that actually nourishes your mind and body, something you can do long term.
Exactly. And don't forget, it's not all about food. Sleep, stress management, exercise, they all play a huge part in keeping your hormones in balance. It's about taking care of yourself on every level.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening. We've really gone beyond sugar is bad and gotten into the nitty-gritty of how it affects our hormones, our brains, even our emotions.
It's complex, for sure. But I think the biggest takeaway is this. The more you know, the better choices you can make. Once you understand how sugar really works, you can start to break free from those cravings and take control of your health.
I love that. Knowledge is power. So to wrap things up, I'd like to leave our listeners with this question. If you could somehow rewire your body's reaction to sugar, what changes would you make in your life, starting right now? Think about your relationship with sugar. How is it affecting you? Remember, even small changes can add up to big results. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of sugar and hormones.